So under what circumstances can someone really lose their US citizenship and be denaturalized? In this video, we're going to continue our conversation about the denaturalization process, how a naturalized citizen can lose their US citizenship. Now keep in mind, this is video number 3. I'm recording on this topic, and this video will mainly focus on all the good questions, comments, concerns that you all raised in the comment section of my previous videos. So if you haven't watched the first 2 videos I recorded on this topic, I would encourage you to watch those after this one, because I address a lot of the main concerns, and this video will focus more on additional concerns and more specific questions that so many of you have raised. That being said, let's jump right into the questions one by one and sort of the main concerns. So the first one I want to get away immediately is a lot of you are worried about ICE arresting you as a U.S. citizen or a naturalized U.S. citizen, and then after that keeping you detained, denaturalizing you, and deporting you. So that's just not how it works. So ICE cannot arrest U.S. citizens. They don't have authority. Under limited circumstances, because they're a federal law enforcement agency, ICE can arrest criminals or can stop crimes from happening, just like any federal law enforcement agency has that power. But these powers are very limited. So ICE detaining and arresting U.S. citizens is not allowed. And if ICE were to detain a U.S. citizen for a prolonged period, that U.S. citizen would have a cause of action against ICE. Basically, the U.S. citizen can sue. Now, given the ongoing raids, there's virtually no situation in which ICE does not come in contact with U.S. citizens. ICE can, ask for documents to prove citizenships, to prove someone's citizenship, etc. But if ICE were to actually detain, especially for a prolonged period, a U.S. citizen, that would be a big problem. And I can give you an example about this. When I worked at the DOJ, we had a case like this, and the individual, he was a U.S. citizen by birth. He was detained for a relatively long period of time by mistake, ended up suing ICE as well as the officer, and he ended up winning a significant fee, basically, in the lawsuit he filed. He recovered a substantial amount because it's a grave mistake. ICE cannot be holding U.S. citizens and arresting them and keeping them detained, right? So that's something that is not allowed. So if you're a naturalized U.S. citizen, ICE arrests and detention should not be your primary worry, simply because if that were to happen, you would have the full backing of the law to bring against the agency. Now, the second question that a lot of you are asking about is basically, what if I committed crimes before I naturalized as a U.S. citizen? And how will that be treated? Can I be denaturalized for these crimes that I committed? So I want to separate these into 2 different categories, right? So you have crimes, the first category, that you disclosed, right? So basically, during your, call it permanent residence process, when you applied for a green card, you disclosed that, for example, you were convicted of public intoxication, or you received a ticket as a minor for drinking, or any other, violation under any criminal code. If you disclose these and the officer considered them, whether it's during the green card application or naturalization application or visa applications before that, then generally speaking, that should not be an issue, because you did not commit any sort of material omission, willful misrepresentation, none of that, right? Like, you were completely honest. In a rare set of circumstances where those offenses were so grave that you should have never become a U.S. citizen, right? So say you committed very serious crimes that should have prevented you from becoming a permanent resident, the government can argue that you illegally procured your U.S. citizenship because those offenses, those crimes that you committed were at such a level that you should have never ever become a U.S. citizen, because you would have been barred just because of the level of those offenses. In that case, the government can technically bring a denaturalization case against you. However, I will say, generally speaking, the cases I have seen, the individuals never disclosed those serious crimes in their applications, and they misrepresented and withheld that information, whether it was during naturalization or applying for permanent residence, because they very well knew that the officer is going to see that crime and immediately deny the application. So to simply summarize this, if you disclosed any crimes that you committed, right, or any offenses, any issues during your application process, generally speaking, the fact that you obtained the immigration benefits, including naturalization, likely makes it that those were not material issues, and that is why you were granted the benefits. In a small set of circumstances where you disclose something truly major that should have never allowed you to become a permanent resident or a citizen, and you were still granted, in those cases, the government could bring denaturalization cases against you because you illegally procured your U.S. citizenship. Now, the second set of questions that I got was, what if I didn't disclose the crimes, right? So what if I had committed crimes and I didn't disclose them, and then, I became a permanent resident and later a U.S. citizen, or I didn't disclose them on my naturalization application. Now, here, I think it's critical to look at whether or not what you did not disclose was material. So the one I got over and over was basically minor things, right? From shoplifting to some traffic tickets that were more severe, like reckless driving, etc. So generally speaking, if the maximum penalty, right, for an offense is less than 1 year of prison time, and you never actually served more than 1 year in prison, in those cases, it's called a petty offense. And there's a petty offense exception for a one-time offense of this nature, right? So these minor offenses that you failed to disclose were likely not material, because had you disclosed them, you would have likely still become a U.S. citizen and a U.S. permanent resident. So when it comes to denaturalization, the government cannot bring, they can bring it, but it would not be a successful case, because they have to show that you should have never become a U.S. citizen, right? That it was a material omission that you made, and that you did not disclose something that would have prevented you from becoming a U.S. citizen. So if you did not disclose one of these more minor crimes or other violations, likely you cannot be denaturalized. Now, of course, if you're worried about this, this is probably an area where it's worth talking to a lawyer to analyze what exactly you did and what exactly you were convicted of. Now, one important thing here, keep in mind when it comes to immigration law, it's generally convictions that matter, not so much charges against you. But at the same time, if you fail to disclose something that you think is serious, yes, then potentially you could be denaturalized. Again, going back to the previous videos, I don't think the government is going to be initiating denaturalization cases against people for not major offenses and major problems. At least that's my experience, and that's everything I know about the process. Now, if you did not disclose something that was truly material, for example, drug trafficking, major possession of drugs, let's not even get into violent crimes, domestic violence, any of that. Well, those are the crimes where, especially if it's something that involves violence, right? Those are the ones that the government can initiate denaturalization procedures for, because you probably would have never become a U.S. citizen in the first place, and you lied about it in your applications. So if you did not disclose something truly major, especially major crimes, well, yeah, then you fall into that small set of naturalized U.S. citizens who probably have more to fear in this memo than others, and it's probably worth it to talk to an immigration lawyer if it really worries you. And again, I just want to make it clear that this is mainly major crimes that we're talking about, and not small offenses, right? That don't have that wouldn't have prevented someone from becoming a U.S. citizen. Again, I know I said it in the previous video, but I keep getting comments about this. Crimes after naturalization cannot lead to denaturalization. So if you became a U.S. citizen, you're a naturalized U.S. citizen, you commit a crime afterwards, you can be punished under the criminal code, but you cannot be denaturalized, because it has nothing to do with you having committed offenses that would have prevented you from becoming a U.S. citizen. Another one I got that's very interesting is crimes by a parent, or omissions by a parent, and basically you were included as part of your parent's application, or your parent prepared your application on your behalf. So here, it could technically become an issue if it was something material that your parent failed to disclose. Then it could be held that you illegally procured your U.S. Citizenship, because if it was material, you likely should have never become a U.S. citizen in the first place. Although this is scary, and I understand, especially because many people don't know what their parents put in their applications, right? Generally speaking, this is an area where, if there's one area where I've seen USCIS generally give a lot of leniency, is when it comes to children. They understand that you cannot be in control of something your parent does. And I'm not saying that's all cases. I'm sure all of you can find a case, where that what I'm saying didn't happen. But generally speaking, while it's true that if your parent made a massive mistake and lied about things, and you should have never become a U.S. citizen, that you could potentially be in a situation where the government thinks that you illegally procured your U.S. citizenship and attempts to denaturalize you. I don't think these cases regarding children, right, who obtained their U.S. citizenship this way would be prioritized. But this is something that I understand many of you are concerned about. I would make sure and try to get, applications and just figure out what was disclosed. Generally speaking, where I think this would come up is if your parent committed some sort of marriage fraud or something to obtain a green card, and you somehow obtained permanent residence through that process. That's where I think this would come up in most cases. But I could see others too. So this is an area worth exploring if you fall into this category. Now, another set of questions many of you asked about was adoption. So you're adopted U.S. citizen, so you were adopted as a young child, as a baby, and you're fearing this memo. I don't want to go into many of the details of adoption because it's a complicated process, and anyway, I would have to record a very long video about that. But basically, the denaturalization process generally does not apply to individuals who were adopted, because you automatically derived citizenship if that adoption was completed properly. So to revoke your citizenship, especially if you obtain it lawfully, is virtually impossible or extremely rare, and there would have to be major issues in how you obtained that citizenship and basically in the adoption process. But if you read this memo and you read, the focus of the denaturalization process, it focuses much more on, like I said in previous videos, crimes and people who misrepresented, omitted material facts in immigration applications and in the process of becoming a permanent resident or a citizen. So adoption, I think, falls outside of this realm. So I wouldn't focus too much on this memo and the denaturalization process if I was adopted. Next set of questions I got was travel and re-entry. So basically, many of you are wondering, I'm a U.S. citizen, I've been living abroad, I've committed a crime for which I was convicted after becoming a citizen, and now I'm outside the country. Will they let me back in? Or I had committed a crime decades ago, disclosed it was never an issue. Is it going to be a problem now when I try to re-enter? And I just want to make this clear. The answer is an absolute underlined, bolded no, right? So U.S. citizens must be let into the country. Even if, there's a warrant out for your arrest, they're still going to let you into the country. They may arrest you the moment you come in because you've done something that you shouldn't have, but they still have to let you in. If you present a U.S. passport at a U.S. Border checkpoint, there's no scenario in which you don't get let in. Now, if, like I said, if the government is trying to arrest you because they think you've committed a crime, then they may arrest you after you enter. But that is under the criminal code. Again, it has to do with criminal violations you have committed and has nothing to do with denaturalization. So again, travel as a U.S. citizen, that is not where you should be worried because you, had some minor incident that you disclosed 30 years ago. Deportation. Basically, a lot of you are saying, will I be deported? Like, is the government going to deport me because I'm a U.S. citizen? Well, keep in mind, first, the Department of Justice has to initiate the whole denaturalization process. Then they have to convince a federal judge to a clear and convincing evidentiary standard, which I talked about in the part 2 video. And then if the judge denaturalizes you, that's when you get to the whole question of, okay, now that you're not a U.S. citizen, what do you do if you don't have a way to stay in the country and file any other applications to remain in the country? That's when deportation would come up. But this idea that the government can somehow just arrest a U.S. citizen, quickly deport them, and push them out of the country is just an absolute impossibility. And I've seen plenty of videos and stuff about this, online, and I just think it's really sad because it makes people afraid of something that just cannot happen. Like I said to question one, if you're a U.S. citizen and ICE arrests you or anything like that, you should be reaching out to a lawyer because they don't have a right to be doing that, and you will have a cause of action, right? But just to make it abundantly clear, U.S. citizens cannot be deported. That's just not possible. And then the final thing I wanted to add, many of you are commenting on, oh, what if I misstated my height or my weight or something, biographic or kind of irrelevant small detail in the application? Can I be denaturalized for that? And the answer is absolutely not, because again, the government has to prove to a clear and convincing standard to a federal judge that these omissions were material. If you were, I'm just going to make this up, 135 pounds and you said 142 on the application, or you're 6 foot, but you said you're 5'11" on the application, well, that's completely immaterial and is not something that rises to the level where the judge would, denaturalize you. And I definitely don't think the government would ever bring a case like that. Now, some things, right, that might seem trivial or not trivial. For example, if you're a member of a, certain party, if you were a member of an armed group that committed war crimes, right? Things like that may just be like, oh, I was a member of an organization and I didn't disclose it. Well, there's a big difference between a terror group or your biology meetup group in high school after classes, right? Like if you omitted one, it's probably immaterial. If you omitted the other one, it's very serious. So again, I'm talking about minor things that are completely irrelevant when it comes to the basis of the application. That is not a reason that you can be denaturalized. And I think these were all the main questions and concerns that many of you raised in the comment section. I think I've answered most questions. If there's anything else, I will record more shorts and long form videos to answer them. If you think the content is good and helpful and you would like to receive notifications when I record more videos, please subscribe to the channel. And again, if you have any concerns, questions, comments, put them in the comment section of these videos, and I'll do my best to record more videos in which I go over all these issues and try to share with you all important information that helps you navigate this process. Thank you so much for tuning in and for watching. Bye.